Did you know that Amazon sellers use AI to build their teams? Today we have a special guest joining us. Michael has a wealth of experience in e-commerce and he has built a successful Amazon business from the ground up. We'll discuss how he built and trusted a remote team, a crucial step that allowed him to focus on growing his business. He'll share his innovative approach to building a team and how he used AI to streamline the hiring process. And for those of you who feel like you are constantly putting out fires and never have time for strategic planning, Michael's method of evaluating and delegating tasks will be a real eye-opener. He'll explain how he identified what tasks to delegate, freeing up his time to focus on what really matters, scaling the business. So stick around because these insights could be the key to taking your Amazon business to the next level. Let's dive into the interview with Michael. I'm super excited for today's interview with Michael. Michael has years of experience in e-commerce, and every time we talk, I learn something new. And I'm sure that today will be no different. It's good to see you, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to be here. We don't get to see each other very much, so it's nice to have an opportunity to sit down.
Yes, I'm happy to welcome you here, and we can now dive into the interview. My first question is that if you can tell us a bit about your background and how you got started on Amazon.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually started in e-commerce back in college. So way back in '96. So pretty much kind of an OG in that category. But I sold in e-commerce in a number of ways. I sold products, I sold information products, I sold, I did some affiliate marketing, did t-shirts, there was a lot of things that I did, but eventually Amazing Selling Machine came around, and that was probably, I don't know, back in 2014, 15, something like that. And I watched, they had like a free video, free webinar series. So I watched the free webinars, and at the end they said, hey, for $3,500, we'll teach you everything we know. And I just basically was like, well, I've been online long enough. I think maybe you taught me enough already. I'm just going to go give it a shot. And so I didn't buy the program. I just went to look for a product that I thought would work. And I ran across a pool net. And although it wasn't really a perfect fit, there were a lot of things about it that made sense. And for me, the way that I fell into, I guess, the business plan that we have in terms of like our USP was really, I didn't have the money or the time at that moment to invest in a lot of product development and redesign and feature changes and things like that. So the question became, how can I differentiate myself in this market without having to invest all of that capital? And the obvious answer was just a warranty, because really nobody in the category was offering any sort of a decent warranty. And even the ones that did, they didn't stand behind it. There were always loopholes, and this is why we're not going to fulfill. So I just decided I was going to do a lifetime warranty. I wasn't going to have any gimmicks or anything. I was just going to, if somebody requested a replacement, I was going to send it to them, which meant I needed to sell at a fairly high price point in the category. But I figured, let's give it a shot. So I bought a case of nets and I put them up under a lifetime warranty, and a week later they were gone. So then I bought 4 cases, and 2 weeks later those were gone. And so I thought, well, that was pretty easy money. So, and it just kind of went from there.
Mm-hmm. So you basically then built the brand around the product rather than other way around, right?
Yeah, for sure. It definitely started with the product, and realistically started with the warranty. Like, I mean, it could have been any product. Not that every product is viable for a lifetime warranty, but far more products than people think are viable for a lifetime warranty. And so I would say we actually built the brand around the warranty, even more so than building it around the product.
Mm-hmm. And what was your initial vision for the business? Was it to transition into running the business full time, or just make a little bit of money on the side?
The original plan was that it would be a full-time business. I had no idea, starting out, whether that vision made sense and whether I'd be able to pull that off. But that was the plan. I was a little concerned about the compensation structure of the company that I was working for at that time. I was a dealer for a multi-level company. And so I was operating exclusively online, but they were still in control of my compensation structure and whatnot. And so I was just looking for an alternative that I wasn't locked in like that and that I had more control over.
Mm-hmm. So how long did it take before you transitioned into running the business full time?
Realistically, it wasn't that long. Now, I will say that actually, that description of how we got started is not entirely accurate. When I first got started on Amazon, I actually started with arbitrage. And so before I watched The Amazing Selling Machine, which was all about private label, I was already on Amazon at that point doing the retail arbitrage. And I'll be honest, I can't even remember where I ran across the idea for that. But what I was doing at the time was I was buying mostly nutritional supplements at we had a local chain store that was around. And anytime this particular brand of supplements went on sale, it would be buy one, get one free. And I knew there were like 3 or 4 different SKUs that if I bought them at buy one, get one free, I could sell them at the right price on Amazon, that I could make pretty decent money at that. So I actually, before I went to private label, I was making decent money with retail arbitrage. I don't know if it was enough yet that it was replacing the income from the other business, but it wasn't all that far off. And so private label was really just a way to reduce the workload, because arbitrage is a lot of work unless you get somebody else going out and buying all the product at all the stores. So that was the transition. But I would say certainly within a couple of years, Amazon was making significantly more money than my other business was.
Mm-hmm. And how did you manage your time at the time? Because you mentioned you basically were spinning multiple plates at the same time. It was your main job, it was the arbitrage, then launching a product on Amazon. So that sounds a bit overwhelming.
It probably would have been, except that the business that I was in previously, because of the way that it was set up, because it was multi-level. So I had really taken advantage of that. And I suppose maybe there's some listeners who maybe don't even know what multi-level is. It used to be a big thing, and I know they still exist out there, but it's probably not as big these days as it used to be. As multi-level marketing was MLM. And so it's essentially like multi-level affiliate marketing, realistically, but you bring in other affiliates or dealers or distributors, whatever you want to call them, that are below you in the chain. So whatever they sell, then of course you also make a commission on the things that they sell in addition to the things that you sell. So I had built a pretty strong customer base of individuals who came back to buy. So I was making commissions on them, but I also had a pretty strong dealer base. And so they were making sales and I was making commissions on that. So once I started working the Amazon business, I really didn't work the previous business at all. I kind of just set that aside and was just relying on the residual commissions that were coming in, which were decent enough that we could pay our bills and it wasn't any big deal. And then as Amazon started to grow, then it filled that gap. So it wasn't as overwhelming as it sounds, because I really didn't have to do a whole lot with the other business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for how long did you manage to run the business on your own before bringing anyone else on board to help you?
I would say it was about 4 years, I think. And the first person that I brought on was customer service. Because realistically, for me at that time, customer service actually was one of the largest pieces of the puzzle in terms of my time investment. And a lot of that had to do with the warranty, because it wasn't just, where's my order or things like that, but it was, I need a replacement or this is wrong. And, I had to walk through that process. So I brought on somebody to handle the electronic aspect of our warranties and customer service, which was the bulk of it. And that actually freed up quite a lot of time. So that was, it was exceptionally useful in terms of growth of the company, because it freed me up to do a lot of other things that I didn't have time to do otherwise.
Mm-hmm. I see a lot of sellers struggle with the transformation from running their business solo to actually building a team. And it sounds like you approach this just from the perspective of saving you time. I need to find someone who will give me a chunk of my time back so I can then focus on some higher level activities.
Yeah, that's absolutely how it was. It was really just a time factor. And it was obvious to me that the thing I was spending the most time on that somebody else could do, right? Because those are two different things. There's the things that you're spending a lot of time on, but they should be the things that you're spending time on. And then there's the things you're spending a ton of time on that you could easily train somebody else to do that. And so customer service was, to me, the most obvious one that I could train somebody else to handle that and transition myself out of that position.
Mm-hmm. And how did you learn to let go and trust your team? Because for me, this was a huge challenge. And I talk to dozens and dozens of sellers that have the same issue to actually trust someone to take care of some area of the business. And it sounds like customer service, thanks to the variety, is a huge part of your business. So really, the trust there must have been very, very important for the first hire.
Yeah, that was pretty difficult for me because I was really concerned when I brought that person on initially because, like you say, the warranty was such a huge part of our business and our review profile and everything. Like our business was literally built around that I couldn't afford for that to go wrong. And so I was actually pretty careful with that first hire in terms of who I brought on, feeling very confident that she had the same perspective that I had and that she kind of understood the brand and what it was that we were doing and kind of how we were operating. Now, I would say it did help that with our warranty, because I was so liberal about it, because essentially every warranty claim I more or less just rubber stamped and sent out another replacement. That simplified things a lot because she didn't have as many decisions to make in that process of customer service. So in that sense, it did really simplify that. It was basically, look, unless there's some really extreme circumstance where you think we shouldn't, fulfill on this, just say yes and just do what's necessary to get it fulfilled and get a product sent out. If there's a situation where you're not sure, then ask me about it, and then over time, of course, she got to know what those situations were where it was, no, we're not going to fulfill on that. And so she didn't have to contact me that much. So that did simplify things a lot.
Is this person still on board with you?
Yeah, she's still with us.
Nice.
She's great.
And
love her.
What was your approach to hiring these first few team members? If you can just walk us through the whole process of hiring.
Yeah, realistically, the first hires, everything was through Upwork because, of course, and I would say this is likely true for most online sellers. Most new hires at the beginning are contractors, for various things that you need done, and obviously Upwork is a good place for that. And so that's kind of where we started, and it worked out relatively well. It wasn't a perfect process, and I, of course, was not very well versed in the hiring process. I hadn't taken any business classes in school. I didn't really have any experience with any of that. So it was a struggle initially for me to know exactly how to walk that process forward. And actually, it's been so long since I did that hiring, I really couldn't tell you exactly what that process looked like, except to say that the one thing I know is I tried to be very careful in my job posting to make it clear what the job was, what it was I wanted done, make it clear the type of person that I was looking for. And then I also tried to include some things in that, initial request that would weed people out from the start that, don't follow directions properly or whatever, so like there would be something in there, that said, respond to this with a certain phrase or tell me a certain thing, but it would be kind of, hidden in the entire context of the job posting so that if you didn't read it all, you wouldn't have read that and you wouldn't follow the response. And so, it's easy to look at that and kind of be afraid that maybe you're missing out on some really good person who just happened to skim the listing and didn't follow that particular instruction. But I kind of felt like I had to get beyond that because realistically, I wanted somebody who was going to pay attention to the details. And, even if that person was pretty intelligent, if they weren't following the instructions that I gave them, then they're still not the person that I want. And so that was actually pretty helpful for me.
And how has the hiring process evolved over time? Or in other words, how do you hire today?
Yeah, realistically, it didn't change much at all until very recently. And I think a lot of that stemmed from our implementation of your program. When we initially began to build that out for ourselves and kind of use your templates and whatnot, then, we got into that whole HR and hiring, portion. And a lot of the things that were in there made a lot of sense. But at the same time, I actually was also hearing some really good stuff from Josh Hadley, who had published some stuff on hiring and the way that he was doing things. And so essentially, we kind of put those two strategies together. So a lot of the stuff that was in your program, a lot of the stuff that was in Josh's program. And so at this point, well, I can tell you the most recent hire that we just did, I literally just brought on an executive assistant for myself. And this is the third time I've attempted this, let's say. I've tried to bring on an EA on 2 other occasions. And fortunately, those 2 people are still with the company. They're in other roles, and I think they're doing great for us. But I would say in both of those situations, I wasn't ready to have an executive assistant for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't actually know what I wanted them to do. I just knew that I needed more time. And so I was just trying, I thought, okay, this makes sense, right? So I brought them on, but I didn't really know what to do with them. And then I think the other aspect of that was that I wasn't ready to hand over the reins to the things that I needed to hand over in order for an EA to actually be of any use to me. And so those first 2 hires, it was like, nah, this isn't working. I don't know what to do with this. I'm not sure what to give them. So they just kind of naturally moved into other roles because I knew there were other things that I needed done. And so we shifted them there. I would say I'm fortunate that that's worked out well. My guess is for most people that wouldn't work out well. So my thing would be make sure you know exactly what it is that you need done so that you can decide who it is that you actually need to bring in and what that position is. And make sure that you're ready to actually hand over the reins to those things before you do it, because otherwise you're just going to be spending money on this person and they're not going to be doing anything because you're not going to know what to give them. So, be really careful with that. But with this most recent hire, I'm actually pretty thrilled. I feel like he's actually going to work out really well in this position. And the process that we walked through was, so the first thing was developing a role profile, which actually Josh's program is actually pretty good at that. He actually now has a custom GPT, which does a really good job of fleshing out at least a foundational role profile for whatever it is. So in other words, you could go in and just say in this custom GPT, and you could build your own, like you don't have to use his, ChatGPT is great for this kind of thing, but just to log in ChatGPT, you could even just say something along the lines of, you are an expert, human resources manager. You've been hiring people for 20 years and, yada, yada, right? Build them up like, okay, you're the best at this. And then just say, we need to hire somebody in the company to do X, Y, and Z. And what would be the name of the position that most likely would handle those tasks? And ChatGPT will spit that back out to you. And then you can say, okay, if we were hiring for that role, what would all of the tasks that role would likely do in a business? Not just the 3 that I told you, but what are all of the things that particular position would normally handle in terms of their responsibilities? And the nice thing about that is that ChatGPT again is very good at giving you back what the kind of generalized structure is for that role. And what I liked about it was that it helped me to flesh out what are the other things in the business that this person who has a certain personality, a certain skill set, right? ChatGPT is already assuming that whoever you hire has this kind of personality and this kind of skill set because that's the person who's best for this type of a role. So then they're going to tell you all of the things in your business that fit that skill set and personality type and that role type. And a lot of the things that it spit back at me were things that I hadn't even considered. I didn't really even realize were part of that role. Sometimes they're going to be things that you're already doing, but you just don't realize that they fit to that role. And you're going to be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Some of them are going to be things you're not even doing yet, but you're going to read it and you're going to be like, oh, we should really be doing that. And if that person is the best person to do that, then yeah, we absolutely need that person, because not only do we need those things over here, but we need these new things that ChatGPT is telling us that we should do. And some of them you're going to say, no, we don't need to do that. That's not right for our business. And you're going to scratch those. But the nice thing about that is it builds out that role profile really well. If you just keep asking it questions, what should the description of that job be? What should the daily tasks be for that type of a job? What should the weekly kind of thing? It'll build out that role profile really well. And once you have that, it really helps you to then build out the job posting. And again, same thing. You can use ChatGPT and say, look, if this is the role profile and this is what we're offering for this position, how would you write the job, posting? And it'll give you that too. And you can tweak that and, whatever. But we posted that on Upwork, Indeed, and LinkedIn. And we got about 300 applicants. We set up a fairly automated process so that those applicants were all funneled directly into Criteria Corp. And Criteria Corp, on their platform, we were able to run those candidates through a number of tests. So personality tests, aptitude tests. We were able to create a project test that we ran them through. So essentially what would happen is as soon as they came in, they would submit their resume and a couple of other things. As long as they did that, then they would then be asked to do the personality test and the aptitude test. Criteria Corp has a lot of data in their system. So essentially what they'll do is they'll analyze the aptitude and the personality test, and they will give you a score that represents how likely it is that they believe that candidate fits well with the role that you're hiring for. And you can set a threshold and say, if they're not over this level, then they don't qualify to move on in the process. Mm-hmm. And so that was very helpful because out of 300 candidates, I would say we probably ended up with maybe, 60, maybe a little more than that, who were qualified to move forward. And so then if they move forward, then it was a project. And the project was based entirely on the job position that they were going to be coming into. So it was based around what are the things that we're going to want them to be able to do in that job, and how well are they going to be able to critically think about those things and implement the things that need to be done. So we assigned this project, and of the, let's say, 60 people that came through the previous stages, we probably only had, maybe 20 or 25 of them that actually, did the project. Mm-hmm. And then we had to manually, look at the results of the project, decide which one of them, okay, yes, they did a good job. These guys didn't. So then that weeded it down even further. Maybe we ended up, with I think at the end of that, we ended up with 8 candidates, I think is what we ended up with. And so then we did 2 interviews. So I split them up into 2 groups of 4. And we interviewed 4 people in the first interview. Then we did another 4. And, I try to run my interview. I don't know how other people run their interviews. I'll be honest. I haven't had an actual real job with some other company since college. So I don't even know how people run interviews these days. But I was really focused on being careful with my questions to evaluate how well can they think on their feet? What is their moral compass? How well can they operate with others? Just some very pointed things that I thought were going to be critical. And then I really liked one of the things that Josh does at the end of his interviews is that when he does these group interviews, he asks all of the candidates, which one of these candidates would you hire? And you can't count yourself. You can't vote for yourself. And why? Who would you hire and why would you hire them? And if it wasn't you? And I actually kind of like that. I feel like it might have been slightly more beneficial if we'd had a slightly larger group of candidates, maybe 5 or 6 versus just 4. And I only say that because it was more difficult it's not a large enough data set, let's say, right? Because if you've got people voting on who they would choose, what if it's very split? What if each person votes for a different person? Well, then that doesn't really help you much. But as soon as you get maybe 5 or maybe 6 candidates on a group interview, then I think you have a large enough data set that it's likely that multiple candidates are going to vote for the same person, and it gives you some clarity there. Obviously, you're not just going to hire based on that. But it was interesting, though. I had the same result that Josh generally says that he has, which is almost always the candidates vote for the same person that you believe was the best of that interview. And so it's just kind of a confirmation, which was kind of nice. So then we did one last interview with the people who made it through. We ended up with 4 candidates that we invited. Only 3 of them made it to that final interview. And that final interview was a project. And honestly, that project was, again, based on what would they need to do as an EA for me. But I wanted to do it in such a way, I'm looking for something very specific in an EA. And I don't know if all, executives are looking for this type of assistant, but I want an assistant who's going to be assertive, that's going to say to me, no, you really need to do this today. You can't put this off to another day, because I know how I am. I need somebody that I'm not going to be able to kind of walk over and it's going to say, no, you need to do this. I also need somebody who's going to be very proactive, like in looking at the projects and the tasks and the ideas and the goals that that are spitting out of my head, and that can look at that list and say, I can do that. You should do that. We should talk about that. I can do some research on this, and then we'll come back to it. This is something we can move on today. We already have the people, right? I need somebody who's going to be able to think through that, take the things off of my plate that don't belong there, leave the things on my plate that do belong there, organize my schedule accordingly. So I basically gave them that. Like the project was, here's a list. These are things that I know I need to do, like tasks. These are meetings that I know I need to have. These are ideas that I have, projects that I think we could implement as a company. Like I gave them a list of like 15 things. And I was careful to put on that list things that, that I knew some of those things should go on their list. They shouldn't be on my list. Like those should be things that you take on as a project. You go research it. You give me, you come back to me with, with some sort of a presentation about what we should do or shouldn't do. And only one of the candidates came out really well from that. Like they took that list. They were like, no, I should do this. I should do this. You should do this. We should talk about this. And then I'll go do whatever. And they wrote this all up and they scheduled it out. And it was perfect. It was exactly what I was looking for. And I felt like that was, and I gave them an hour. They didn't know that was what was coming. Like when they came on, because I wanted to know how well do they work under pressure. So when they got on, I didn't ask any questions. I basically just said, leave your camera on, leave your microphone on. Here's a link to your project folder. You have an hour. Finish as much of the project as you can. And then I just sat and I just kind of watched. I wanted to see what's their face look like. How nervous do they look? Are they anxious or are they just, really focused? And I learned a lot out of that. I actually think it worked really well. It probably wouldn't work extremely well for every position that we might hire for, but for this one, I think it was perfect.
Mm-hmm. And how long did the process take from actually making the decision to bring this person on board to now onboarding him?
3 or 4 weeks.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay. And all of these team members you are now hiring, everyone is hired remotely?
Yeah, everybody's remote.
Okay.
Yeah, we do all remote. In fact, it's actually interesting. The guy that I just hired, we're in Puerto Rico. He's in Miami. So even though he's remote, he's actually close enough. I can pay like $50 and have him fly over here so we can actually have an in-person meeting, once in a while. So that might be nice. But yeah, he's remote just like everybody else.
Mm-hmm. And what is the current size of your team, including this new hire?
So we have, that'll make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess that'll make a team of 5, not including me. But one of those individuals will be kind of phasing out. She was a temporary hire that was arranged ahead of time. She's the one that I hired on to help us implement your system, just because, and I mentioned this in a post that I put up recently on our discussion board, that I think I love the system that you put together. And I think, and you could elaborate on this a little bit. It might be useful for listeners, but it strikes me that essentially your system is best for a solo entrepreneur who really doesn't have much of a team yet. And so it's just put this in, kind of make a few adjustments to that, to what feels like it fits your business and kind of just roll with it. I think that a business that has somewhat of a team together and already has some processes and structure in place and it's working fairly well, I actually think that it's a little bit more difficult process to implement your system into that, because then you're having to, merge the two together. And although I think it's going to work out really well for us, and I'm still happy that I purchased your system, I needed somebody else to come onto the team who was really good at operations and structure and whatnot. Because 1, I knew I didn't have the time for it. And 2, my brain just doesn't really think that way. And so even though it was more expensive to do that, because not only did I pay for your program, but now I've also paid for this person, I think at the end of it, we come away with something, much better.
Yeah, it is definitely easier to build out something from scratch, right? Rather than actually thinking how to restructure an existing business. It's not impossible. We do that as well. But of course, it takes a little bit more time because we need to be more selective of what to change and then how to change it. Because as you said, some of the things do not need to be changed, right? Some things are already working, so you definitely don't want to change something that's already doing its job. So yeah, absolutely. And can you just walk me through the current roles on your team? Because you mentioned it's five employees. We talked about the executive assistant. So what about the four other roles?
Yeah. So we still, of course, have the customer service agent. I would say that, interestingly enough, that position we may be essentially phasing out for the most part. And I mean, we're going to keep her on the team. I'm going to find another position for her because essentially she's just amazing. And I know that I can find something that she'll do well for us. But we are coming to a spot where, because of the way that our customer service operates, we will be able to replace that almost entirely with AI within the next, I'd say, 3 to 6 months, most likely. So, but anyways, we have customer service. We have a supply and logistics person. I have another individual who is, at the moment, their job essentially is kind of a split role where they are tasked with creating a KPI dashboard for our company so that we can manage all of the KPIs for various positions within the company and kind of keep tabs on that and produce reports on that to see how's everybody doing with regards to those KPIs. But then also has a supporting role for our inventory and logistics person. He does a lot of our forecasting and things like that. And then he kind of works on some individual projects here and there for me. So I wouldn't say that he has an extremely defined role. He's actually one of the ones that originally I brought in as an EA. So he's kind of been in flux ever since I brought him in. But he's a great guy, and he actually gets a lot done for us. So and then the one lady that I brought in for operations, who will be phasing her out over time. And then I have another gentleman who is essentially the marketing manager. So he's kind of over social media and all of our off Amazon external marketing and whatnot. He's also taking on the project right now of setting up our Walmart marketplace, and he'll be working with the essentially Walmart has offered us some individuals to kind of help walk us through the process of best practices with trying to get set up over there. And so he'll be working with them to get that set up.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And how do you decide which tasks you want to delegate and which tasks you want to still handle personally?
I would say, I don't know that I've been extremely good about this, but I'd say I've been better than average maybe at recognizing where are the bottlenecks. So I mean, I really think that there is kind of just a simple process of looking at your day and saying, where am I spending the majority of my time that doesn't really require me? That there's somebody else out there who's at least as good at me at this, and probably somebody out there who might even be better than me at this. And then I have to decide, okay, do I want to pay maybe more for that individual who would be better than me at this position, or can I actually pay a little bit less and find somebody who maybe isn't quite as good as me at this, but this role isn't that critical? Like, we can create SOPs and processes that'll walk this person through that process, and they're going to get it 90% of the way there. And that 10% is really not that critical, because the time that it's going to free up in my schedule is way more important than the actual work that's getting done. And so I think I've been pretty good at that. I wouldn't say amazing, but maybe better than average at that. At just looking at my schedule and saying, where's that bottleneck, that will free up the most time, and that is the job that really is that least requires me to be the one to do it.
It sounds like you've built a very, very good team. But I wonder, have hiring ever gone wrong for you? Were there any bad hires or something, some bad decisions in delegation, maybe delegating something you shouldn't have?
Well, I would say definitely trying to hire an EA sooner than I was ready for one was a problem. And I think it's valuable actually to point this out, because I think there's a lot of individuals who have tried hiring people into their business and it doesn't work out. And instead of taking an introspective look at that and trying to figure out what they might have done wrong in that process that caused it to go poorly, versus just simply looking at it as it was the wrong person, they just weren't good, they didn't have the skill set, whatever. Because I think, I don't know, I'd say at least 9 times out of 10, regardless of the reason that person doesn't work out, it's your fault. Either you didn't vet them properly, the interview process wasn't good, you didn't take enough time to make sure that they were right, you didn't run them through kind of a probationary period at the beginning to make sure they were good before you really brought them on contractually or something, whatever it is. But, or again, you weren't ready to relinquish the reins on whatever it was that you brought them in for. I just feel like, especially for Amazon sellers, because most of us we didn't come into this already having business experience. Most of us didn't go to school for this. We didn't have any experience working for some other company. Many of us just kind of started this as a hobby or, as a side venture, and it just turned into something. So we don't really understand what that process looks like for hiring people. And so I think it makes sense for us to look at ourselves first rather than looking at the candidate and saying it was their fault. But going back to the heart of the question, I would say those 2 EA hires were wrong, but I'm fortunate that they worked out relatively well, that at least I got good people. They weren't maybe either right for the role that I hired them for, or I wasn't ready for it, but they're really good at what they're doing for me now, and I'm happy with that. I do have one other gentleman that I hired on most recently that we're still trying to work through the process of what he might look like for our team. And that's the marketing manager. And I would also say, again, that was mostly my fault. I tried to cheap out on bringing on a brand manager. And I brought on somebody that, quite frankly, he's a smart guy. He understands PPC really well. He understands the ins and outs of the Amazon platform fairly well. And so in that regard, he is, I think, potentially a strong member of our team. The problem was I felt like I was going to be able to train him in the other areas that he was really going to need to be good at to be a brand manager. And the reality was there's way more to being a brand manager than what I was ever going to be able to train him to do unless I was going to train him for the next 3 years. And that's just not feasible. And so I made that mistake of trying to cheap out in that area. And I brought on somebody that wasn't ready for that position. And so now it's a matter of deciding, is he a right fit for the company? And do we need to, just kind of rework what that position looks like and kind of shrink that down to his core skills and then expand from there? Or, is he not right for the company? At the moment, I'm making the assumption that he is right for the company because he is a bright guy and I think he's got a lot to offer. And so I'm operating on that assumption. We'll see if that ends up being true.
I personally like the reminder that we need the right people in the right seats, right? So as you said, you may found the right people, but they were not in the right seat. But overall, with the hiring process, I think that this really describes the overall process very well, because the first thing is to actually define what the seat is, right? And that's what we talk about, the processes, the systems, really understand what we want this role to be about. As you said, the amazing process with ChatGPT, I believe that will be super helpful. And then finding the right person for the job. And I experienced this myself as well, that we found a person, wasn't a great fit for that specific role, but we ended up basically building a new role for that person, for his skill set, for his personality. So I think that this is a good reminder that even though we may find someone who is not a good fit for the role, it does not necessarily mean that it was a waste of time. Think about how to leverage all of that, the hiring process, how to leverage this person and plug them into the business where they can actually make a difference.
Yeah, I also think, if you don't mind me just adding a little bit to that, I think making sure that you pay attention to that consideration at the front end of the interview process. And what I mean by that is, whatever the role is that you're bringing somebody in for, just bring in good people, right? Like, try and assess, what is their ethical mindset? How well can they work with other team members? How, just try to bring in intelligent, good people, because I think there's a much higher likelihood that if they don't fit the role that you're bringing them in for, if you've made a mistake, let's say, in that area, that there's a much better chance that you can find another good role for them just simply because they're intelligent, they can think on their feet, and they're good people. But if you don't pay attention to that on the front end, then I think it's much more likely that you end up with somebody that not only is not good for the role that you hired them for, but also is no good for anything else either. And so then you did waste your time.
Yeah, yeah. I often see people saying that the culture aspect doesn't matter as much when you build your team remotely, but I believe it is as important as building an in-house team, that because you will be interacting with these people, your other team members will be interacting with them as well. So if someone is not a good fit, they simply not a good fit, and the skill set is definitely not the only thing that matters.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you, how do you keep your team aligned with your vision and your goals? Because of course you have your team, everyone is operating a part of the business, but I imagine that you have a vision for the business. So how do you communicate that with your team, and how you keep everyone aligned?
So I think in one sense, we have done very well with that. And in another sense, I feel we haven't done very well with it at all. And I think that would be, there's two sides of that coin that I see that are both fairly critical, but they're not exactly the same thing. And so what I mean by that is I have a vision for the business in terms of how I want us to operate with each other as a team, and how I want us to operate in respect to our customers. And so that vision is very much, our tagline is quality counts, people matter. And, we really try to make sure that, well, first of all, I've tried to make sure that I build a team that I feel already kind of embodies that and believes that from the beginning. So that makes it much easier to implement, to integrate them into the team and understand how we're going to interact with each other and how we're going to interact with customers. So on that front, I think we've done really well, but I would say mostly because everything that I say, whether it's in meetings, whether it's in messages to, our team members, any goal that I set, it always very much centers around that idea of quality and people. Those two things are central to kind of everything. And so they're always hearing that message, in everything that I'm saying and how I'm kind of interacting with them and with customers. So that part's been easy. I mean, relatively easy, let's say. And part of that is because I brought in the right people. I think the part of it that I haven't done as good a job with is the vision for the company from a, let's say, financial success side, in terms of the metrics of the company, in terms of revenue and profitability and things like that. We have set goals, but we haven't been really good about tracking and assessing how well we're doing in terms of achieving those goals on a regular basis, and then evaluating where exactly is it that we're falling short, and is there a way to fix that to get us back on track, or have we determined that that was an improper direction to begin with and we need to change course in order to get to the goal? Or is that goal not achievable at this point? That's something we haven't done a very good job over. And actually, to be perfectly frank, part of that is because we've been in build mode in terms of like the processes and structure and whatnot that I purchased from you and that I'm trying to build into the company. And so while we've been in build mode, we haven't been as much in implementation mode. So some of those processes are in place. Some of that structure is in place. We're utilizing some of it. Some of it is kind of coming into being as we're moving forward. And that's actually kind of where we are right now is, hey, we need to do a better job of delineating, what is our end goal, in a year, in 5 years, whatever that is, how are we going to get there? And then make sure that we're evaluating that regularly, and not just evaluating whether we're on track, but why aren't we on track and what can we do to fix it, individually and as a team.
Mm-hmm. I'm also curious, what does a typical day look like for you right now compared to when you first started? Because we talked about the team you have, we talked about the systems you built. So can we look at it? What are the main differences? How many hours it actually requires to run a business like this?
I'm working a lot of hours right now, but the reality is that if I break down my day, I wouldn't say that a lot of those hours are invested in the business. They're not even necessarily invested on this business because I have a number of other, businesses that I'm working on right now, which, realistically, I would not be able to do if I hadn't brought on these teams and if I hadn't put in these processes. So, we're getting ready to launch our warranty management system, for e-commerce sellers. We're hoping that that launches within the next couple of months. There's no way I would ever have been in a position to even try and build that out if I hadn't been able to offload some of those in the business kind of activities to other people. We're starting this, Matt and John and I are starting this consulting business, and we've got the podcast that we're doing. So we do a ton of recording every week. I would never have time for that. That's not something that would be possible. So even though I'm probably still putting in, well, let's see. I would say on the business itself, on business in general, not necessarily just Amazon, but like everything. I probably spend 9 hours a day, maybe on all businesses combined. And then I've got kind of my personal stuff. So, my workouts in the morning and Bible study and, kind of my personal stuff in the morning. And then, I like to try and wrap up by 6 o'clock in the evening. Sometimes I don't quite wrap up that quick, but I try to. So, but then I would say maybe a third of that is devoted to ProTuff. If I was really to break it down, and most of that really is wrapped around strategies, new products that, or new marketing opportunities. Should we change our focus in terms of our customer avatar? That kind of on the business kind of stuff. I do some stuff that's in the business, but it's more so because I like it and I'm learning, so a lot of it is like AI stuff, so trying to automate processes and things like that. I've been tossing around the idea of hiring somebody for automation, and AI to maybe a consultant role or something like that to help us to work through what things can we automate even further than we have, and what things can't we. But to some degree, I almost don't want to do it because I really enjoy AI and I'm learning a lot. And if I hire somebody on who's doing that, then I feel like I'm going to step away from that. And then I'm going to be behind the curve and I'm not going to know the things that I need to know about AI walking forward if I've got somebody else doing that. But I don't know hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will definitely put a link to your podcast in the description because I believe that your podcast quickly became one of the best in the Amazon space. So I think definitely people should check it out. I have one more question because as I'm listening to you talk about the team and the business and your goals with the business, I'm pretty sure that most sellers would love to be in your position and would like to get their business into that place. But so I wanted to ask you, for Amazon sellers who may be around like high six figures, but who might feel stuck, they haven't made the leap, as you talked about, of actually bringing those people on board to help them scale the business. What advice would you give them?
If I had to guess, I would say it's highly likely that most sellers in that position, there is one central hire that they could bring on that would probably free up a third of their time or more to do more of the on business strategy type stuff. And so I think my recommendation would be really take the time to evaluate what you're doing in a day and what you're spending your time on, whether it's using a tool like Toggle or whatever it is. But really get a good gauge of what are you putting your time into. And then once you've done that, separate those tasks off into categories that you think are kind of related, that might fall under the same jurisdiction in terms of a role within the company. And then evaluate, okay, how many hours, once I've separated those tasks off and I know how many hours a week I'm devoting to those, and now I've got them categorized by essentially a role, then just look at the one that has the most time devoted to it and ask yourself, do you think there's somebody out there that could do that job as well as you? Or at least 85% as well as you. Maybe not 100% as well, but at least 85% as well. If you think there's somebody out there that you could afford to pay to do that job 85% as well as you, then you need to go find that person. Because as soon as you free up that third or half of your day, that instantly starts that ball rolling to where you realize that you can do this, that you can bring on somebody else and they can take on some of those responsibilities and your business doesn't fall to pieces. Everything is still moving forward. So you prove to yourself that it's possible and that you don't have to be the one to do everything. But then also now you have the time that you can take another stab at, okay, well, do I have enough money to hire another person? If I do, maybe I do that today. Like maybe I start right now. If I don't have enough money left to hire another person, well, then now I just take advantage of the time that I've been given and do the most effective thing that I can do within my business to give me the greatest amount of result. So I would say the process looks like find the time bottleneck, fill it with another person. Then once you have that time availability, determine whether you can pay for another person or you can't. If you can't, then I think the next thing is, okay, if I can't hire another person yet, I need more money. I need more revenue or better profitability or both. So then the next thing is, what is the next best strategy that I can implement today that I already have most of the requirements to do it? I don't have to hire more labor. I don't have to gain more skill. I don't have to, I already essentially am ready to do this. I just haven't done it. And I know that it would give me an extra 20% in revenue or an extra 10% in profit or whatever it is. Do the thing that will get you to the next step where you have the money to bring on one more person and then start the process all over again.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming, Michael.
Yeah, no, glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. Michael's journey highlights the power of strategic delegation and the importance of leveraging AI in our businesses. By building and trusting a remote team, he was able to shift focus from daily operations to strategic growth, transforming his business and personal well-being. In our next video, I'll show you how you can prepare your Amazon business to run without you. You will learn how to systematically delegate, automate, and streamline your operations. And if you need one-on-one help systemizing your Amazon business and building a team, make sure to check out the link in the description. See you next week.